Russian troops tighten their grip on rebels and refugees in the Chechen capital. From Israel, a teenager is sentenced for a murder he committed in the U.S., but some ask whether he got off easy. And the polls are just closed in Argentina's presidential elections, apparently bringing a political era to a close. Hello and welcome to World News. I'm Debra Daugherty at CNN Center. 24 million voters in Argentina have had their chance. Now the nation awaits word on who will succeed Carlos Menem as president. Mayor Fernando de la Rúa of Buenos Aires is widely expected to be the winner. Mr. Menem was constitutionally prohibited from seeking a third consecutive term. We'll have a live report from Buenos Aires later in the newscast. Russian forces are stepping up their pressure on the breakaway Republic of Chechnya, despite increasing international criticism. On Sunday, Moscow poured more men and equipment into the campaign to seal off the Chechen capital, Grozny. Russian artillery have been pounding the outskirts of the city, and the last escape route from refugees from Grozny has been cut. CNN's Mike Hanna reports on the growing humanitarian toll of Moscow's offensive in Chechnya. An estimated 4,000 ethnic Albanian villagers have been gathering in the Kosovo town of Orahovac. Their mission? To make it clear they still don't want Russian peacekeeping troops stationed in that town. Sunday's demonstrations came 2 months after barricades went up to prevent Russian troops from being deployed there. German and Dutch peacekeepers have vowed not to pull down the barriers by force. Orahovac was the scene of fierce fighting during the Serb crackdown on ethnic Albanians in Kosovo earlier this year. A new effort toward peace has begun in Colombia. Hundreds of thousands of anti-war protesters turned out Sunday in the streets of Bogota and other cities, while in the town of Irvine, long-awaited peace talks opened between the government and rebels. The protesters want an immediate end to nearly 4 decades of violence, which has claimed at least 30,000 lives. Journalist Martin Hodgson reports on the political mood in Colombia.
This is not the first time that we've tried for peace talks here in Colombia.
In Switzerland, the right-wing nationalist SVP is poised to make big gains in Sunday's parliamentary elections. Television projections find gains of nearly 23% for the SVP, which would give it a stronger say in how the country is run. CNN is keeping track of the vote counting in Switzerland and will keep you updated with developments there. Results in the election in Tunisia aren't expected until Monday, but the vote tally appears to be a foregone conclusion. Polls have closed in the country's first multi-party election. Even before the vote, the incumbent president, 2 challengers, had already conceded they didn't have much of a chance of winning. President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali is running for his 3rd 5-year term. Tunisia has run 1 candidate for president since gaining independence from France in 1956. Coming up on World News, an Israeli court imposes a controversial sentence involving a murder committed in the United States. Also, words of goodwill from Baghdad to the Vatican, as Catholics wait for news on a possible visit by the Pope. An Israeli court has sentenced an American teenager to 24 years in prison for a murder he committed in the United States. CNN's Walter Rogers takes a look at the trial that puts a strain on U.S.-Israeli relations.
Samuel Scheinbein was led into court handcuffed. He had already confessed to the 1997 murder and mutilation of Alfred Tello Jr.
For a 3rd day running, hundreds of Palestinian demonstrators in the West Bank town of Hebron. They're demanding the resignation of the city's mayor. The protesters hold him responsible for a fire at an unlicensed factory last week that killed 14 women workers. The mayor and the city council are accused of not doing enough to close down sweatshops that operate without permits and lack basic safety features. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has added his congratulations to Pope John Paul II as the Pope celebrates his 21st anniversary as head of the Roman Catholic Church. Representatives from the Vatican are trying to arrange for the Pope to visit Iraq in December. As CNN's Rula Amin reports, A group of Iraqi Catholics is anxiously awaiting news of the visit.
At St. George's Church, using the same words Jesus spoke with, the Aramaic language, Iraqi Christians celebrated a Mass.
Still ahead on world news, the man expected to become East Timor's president gets a hero's welcome from independence rebels. Chinese President Jiang Zemin has arrived in Paris after spending the weekend at the country home of French President Jacques Chirac. The two leaders announced plans for a special hotline between their capitals. Earlier, hundreds of human rights activists gathered around the Bastille to protest Mr. Jiang's visit. They carried banners condemning Chinese executions and calling for freedom for Tibet. For the first time since he returned to the region, East Timorese resistance leader Shanana Gusmão has visited the base camp of independence rebels who fought off pro-Indonesia militia. As CNN's Marina Kamamura reports, the former rebel leader drew a hero's welcome.
East Timorese independence leader Shanana Gusmão conducted a stirring review of his troops.
Indonesia's new president, Abdurrahman Wahid, has announced wide-ranging changes in the country's domestic and foreign policies. Mr. Wahid told a gathering of businessmen, politicians, and diplomats in Bali that his government intends to improve the lives of the country's impoverished masses. In a diplomatic shift, he said Indonesia intends to build closer economic relations with Israel to end years of animosity between the two countries. He also announced plans for a visit to China and other Asian nations in the coming weeks. Now for a check of weather conditions around the world, we go to Orland, Sydney at the International Weather Center.
For Monday evening, the high-pressure ridge continues across most of Korea and into the Japanese islands.
As people around the world eat more processed food, they're becoming more concerned about whether they're getting all the necessary nutrients. Well, now the food industry is stepping in to ease those worries with so-called designer foods. CNN medical correspondent Linda Chiempa has details.
When Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, couldn't find nutritious fast food, he went back to the drawing board and came up with the Dill Burrito.
Now for a look at the headlines. Russian forces are enforcing their siege of Grozny Sunday with artillery fire and air attacks. But with Russian troops now blocking all the roads out of the Chechen capital, civilians are trapped inside Grozny. At least 200,000 refugees are reported to have fled Chechnya since the latest fighting began. Argentina's opposition alliance leader Fernando de la Rúa appears to be the nation's winner of presidential election. Exit polls released after polls closed Sunday says Mr. de la Rúa received 51% of the vote, enough to avoid a runoff with his nearest challenger, ruling Peronist Party candidate Eduardo Duhalde. The official vote count is expected later. An Israeli court has sentenced an American teenager to 24 years in prison for a murder committed in the United States. Under Israeli law, he could possibly be free in 14 years. Samuel Scheinben fled to Israel days after the discovery in the U.S. of the dismembered body of a teenage friend. For World News, I'm Debra Daugherty. Stay tuned for CNN's latest news. Thanks for watching.